Welcome back, Raider Nation and my champions. It's Eric from CSN, and yes, it is time for training camp. We're going to go over the first couple of days of the training camp as well as talk about the pre-training camp that happened the weekend before. So let's get right to it. And we're going to talk about what I call the two camps, and there was a pre-training camp that was held for the rookies, quarterbacks, and quote selected veterans that started on Saturday and finished on Monday, and then the actual regular training camp that started on Tuesday for everyone. Part of the things I've seen during the training camp coverage so far is that they are not in full pads, full contact yet. Some contact. Sometimes they're wearing their regular helmets, and sometimes they're wearing these soft padded helmets during their offensive and defensive drills. Now, here's some pictures that I pulled here that I thought were pretty interesting for the rookies coming in on Saturday. Here's my boy Malcolm Kuntz here. He looks like he's in phenomenal shape, ready to sack Patrick Mahomes right now. Dylan Stoner, a camp favorite, wide receiver. And then you got our backfield that we drafted here as far as free safeties and Merrick and Gillespie. And of course, I could not leave out first round pick, Mr. Alex Leatherwood. I also want to report on some of the injuries that were reported prior to training camp and some recent ones. So let's first get to the ones that were prior to training camp. And this is important for a couple of reasons. First one's the obvious one. They're not going to be available. They could fall behind. And maybe if they're a fringe on making the team, that could be the difference between making the team or not. The other one is we are only allowed to have up to 90 active players on the roster right now. These guys that are injured and put on these individual lists frees up spots for other players to be able to come in and either maybe possibly make a practice squad or even the active roster at the end of August. So let's get into it. First couple I want to talk about is Divine Diablo. We've been talking about him. I'll talk about his injury specifically a little bit, kind of went into it a little bit. And Isaiah Johnson, both these guys are on the PUP list. This is the physically unable to perform list, and this is football related, they say. Now, they didn't get into as far as specifics, so both of these guys are probably expected to come back into training camp at some time, maybe a couple weeks from now. And then we have a couple guys, Darius Stills and Devery Hamilton, two tackles that are on the what they call NFI or non-football related injury list. So they should both be back at some point during the preseason. As far as the injuries that were reported yesterday, the first one was Kenyon Drake. He was put on the PUP list, unspecified. I'm not hearing much of the extent of this injury. I will get that to you as I get it. And then the other two, Jalen Richard and Theo Riddick, they were both put on the COVID-19 list. Now, they're not specifying whether or not they actually have COVID-19 or maybe they were exposed and they're in quarantine. Again, I will get more information to you as I get that. Next thing I want to talk about are a couple interviews that happened this week. One with Derek Carr, the other one with John Gruden, and there was some significant information I thought that came out of that. So let's start with Derek Carr first. First thing he talked about was that basically he's very confident that Andre James is going to start, and not only start, but do well at center. They've had a lot of reps together. Of course, he had to preface it by saying he missed Rodney Hudson, being diplomatic and, how great he was. But he feels that Andre James is not only going to be serviceable, but do a good job at the center position. That's very encouraging. The next one was even more so, and I'll get to this why. They mentioned Gus Bradley, and he kind of went into this thing as far as him being more in command of this defense. Now, of course, he always had to be diplomatic and talk about how Paul Gunther was so smart and this and that and blah, blah, blah. But, the defense sucked. But he didn't say that part, of course. But, of course, Gus Bradley's energy. And they both actually kind of said this. Gruden said this as well. But what got me with Derek Carr was that he said that he was out on the field, and when Gus Bradley would speak to the 11 on the field on defense, he would notice that they would all stop what they were doing, look at him, and listen. He had total command of the defense, and it kind of gets me thinking that, well, maybe Paul Gunther didn't have total command of the defense, and that dissension and disinterest played a big role in the defense stinking so bad and the players being out of position, and it all kind of added up to each other. So to me, that is very optimistic, and I keep hearing this about Gus Bradley, and I'm trying to temper my expectations, of course, with a first year in a new system, but we finished 25th on defense. I said we're going to finish around 20th. I think that's realistic, but who knows, maybe even higher. Next thing he mentioned, and they kind of gave him a softball here, and to me it's pretty obvious, it's probably obvious for you too, is that basically that this year's rookie crop are further ahead in their progressions right now than 2020 rookies were last season. And obviously it makes sense because of COVID, we didn't have a full preseason, blah, blah, blah. Of course, Derek, being a leader, he was very diplomatic in saying, nothing wrong with the 2020 rookies in and of themselves. They just didn't have enough preparation time as these guys did. And it makes sense, makes total sense. So let's get to John Gruden. There's a few good whoppers here, in my opinion. The first one I want to talk about, I teased this earlier, is Divine Diablo. We finally get to hear what the heck's going on with him. And this is his quotes. I'll give you the quotes here. So he said Divine Diablo had, quote, a tweaked knee. He ended up getting, quote, a procedure, and, quote, he should be back within the next couple of weeks. So that kind of tells me that maybe he did something to his knee. He maybe got a little clean out, and it's going to take a few weeks, and he should be back. Hopefully this is legit. This is not smoke, and Divine Diablo gets back on the field. He needs it. He's a rookie, and I think he could do very well, especially in that nickel linebacker spot that they drafted him for. The next one, a little bit different. I call it Unsolved Mysteries. Now, he talked about the secondary. First talked about corner, and he was very optimistic. And then he kind of did an about face when talking about, quote, the safety position. He called it unsolved. And I'm like, what the hell? He basically said, well, we have all this draft talent, blah, blah, blah. We really don't know what's going on. Kind of gets me a little worried. And then he kind of ended that little line of speech with saying, well, Ron Milius, the secondaries coach, is great, and basically he'll be able to solve it, and if he doesn't, then we kind of made mistakes, kind of aka we drafted the wrong people. I mean, we drafted Gillespie in the 4th round to solve this free safety issue. We didn't pick up any free safety in free agency. And then we brought back Carl Joseph, who was a former 1st-round pick. We spent a 1st-round pick at Jonathan Abram for the box safety. Yeah, you better have it together. This is a bunch of bullshit. And him saying unsolved, that really disturbs me at that safety position. The next one he talked about was Alex Leatherwood, and they talked about him. Of course, he always prefaces this all throughout the offseason, when people ask him, well, what about this guy? What about that guy? He always says, well, we haven't seen these guys in pads yet, blah, blah, blah. And I agree with that, but one of the things he said about Alex Leatherwood was that he, quote, had no doubt about him as a football player. Basically he's going to be able to be plugged in at that right tackle spot, no question. He also commended Colton Miller coming in. He's looking good, physically in camp. He's ready to go. So it sounds like we're going to be good to go, at least at the edge of the offensive line. And then the last one, I just called it shout outs and mentions. He mentioned a number of players, and some I want to really focus on is, first one is Yannick Ngakoue. He talked about him a couple times during this interview. Obviously, it's making a sound impression on him. We've heard he came in bigger and stronger. He also talked about, at this point in his career, he's going to be more of a leader and a captain on this team, which I like as well. Talked about Max Crosby kind of coming back. Well, he had 7 sacks with a busted up shoulder, so he should be even better this year, and I agree with that. And then he talked about Malcolm Kuntz looking good, which I like. I like my boy Kuntz, you know that. He talked about Gillespie being able to be flexible. He could play in high safety or in the box. He's even talking about him maybe going to slot corner. I don't know if that's smoke or not, but we'll see. And he also talked about Nate Hobbs. We always hear good things about Nate Hobbs, and how he's versatile inside and out, and that he's going to be in the nickel spot for now. Now, he didn't say he's starting at nickel, but he just might be. We'll see about that. The one thing he said was Damon Arnett, and he talked about him again being a 1st-round pick, and then he said he's an opening day starter. Now, kind of blurbed it out. He wasn't real clear about that. Now, is he saying he's going to be an opening day starter this year, or that he should be an opening day starter because he's a 1st-round pick? I would hope both, but he wasn't really specific on that. So, again, we're going to have to wait and see. I'm still thinking that Casey Hayward's going to be the starter, especially what was coming out at minicamp, but again, we'll find out. But the next player I really want to talk about is Henry Ruggs. Now, I did mention him in a previous live stream last month about him bulking up about 10 or 15 pounds. And it's kind of echoing here during training camp. If you look and you hear what people are saying about him, it seems like he's a lot more focused than he was before. He's a lot bigger, a lot stronger. There was a quote in that Derek Carr interview, which I really liked, and he said that he looks like he's running his routes, quote, more violently. So he's running them more physically, and that's exactly what he needed. I think that was one of his weaknesses, other than, being hurt and slowed down by the leg injuries, is that he was kind of getting slow out of the blocks because he wasn't physical enough. And I think he even admits it here now. Here's a quote. He says, "It's a man's game now. I'm not the biggest guy, but I have to get where I can compete with grown men now." So he sees it. He's taking actions to get better. And I like that. I have a lot of optimism for Henry Ruggs this year and this offense in general. And one other thing I want to mention is that on Saturday, we're going to be going live. We're going to have a live stream to conclude our 31 and 31 series on the 31st. 2, we're going to be moving our Raider Rumor Mill this week from Sunday to Saturday, and we're going to have some more updates in training camp. I've already found an article that I just want to tear apart as far as the rumor mills go. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I encourage you to come out and join us.